Hey guys, tonight we begin with the mystery of what might be the most awkward and oddly fascinating question in all of paleoanthropology. What was sex really like for Neanderthals? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken to the sound of wind dragging frost across stone. The sun hasn't yet climbed above the distant ridge, and your breath rises in small puffs, visible even inside the cave. You're a Neanderthal, short, broad, strong, and built like someone who wins every wrestling match simply by standing still. Your world is cold, not in a poetic, emotionally distant way, literally cold. Glacial winds sweep through the steppe, and snow clings to every crevice. You wear the hide of a reindeer, not for fashion, but because it was either that or freeze your extremely important anatomy off. You didn't tan the hide yourself, of course. That was your mate's job, and they're better at not making everything smell like wet goat. Your hands are calloused from shaping flint. Your knees ache from squatting over fire pits. And your hair, it's somewhere between mossy helmet and feral dog caught in a windstorm. Grooming is done with bone combs and occasional help from bored group members who may or may not be picking lice for fun. Your tribe is small, a dozen or so individuals, some old, some younger. You know them all by scent before sight. There's no written language, no surnames, and certainly no secrets. Everyone hears everything, even the moments you wish were private. You live in a shallow cave that's dark, smoky, and damp. Not the seductive kind of dark, just the hope that mold isn't sentient yet kind. The hearth is the heart of it all. Food is shared, stories are gestured more than told, and sleeping arrangements are mostly dictated by who doesn't snore like a dying aurochs. Sex in this world isn't casual, though it might seem that way from the outside. It's survival, continuation, a chance to pass on your robust skull structure and excellent cold weather lungs. But it's also bound by a kind of closeness born from shared hardship. You don't date. You form bonds through firewood collection, meat sharing, and occasionally not dying during a hunt. You don't think of yourself as primitive. This is just life. And if it includes the occasional stolen moment behind a mammoth hide curtain while others pretend not to notice, well, that's as intimate as it gets in the Pleistocene. Romance for you begins with proximity to warmth and not just metaphorically. In your world, snuggling is less of a flirtation and more of a survival imperative. If you're not pressed against at least two other hairy bodies by nightfall, you're either incredibly brave or about to become a stylish Neanderthal popsicle. Forget candle-lit dinners. The real aphrodisiac, a fire that actually stays lit through a snowstorm, and someone who doesn't hoard all the dried marrow scraps. Swoon. There's no will they, won't they. It's more like, will they share their mammoth fur? Yes. Then they're clearly into you. You don't have words for love, but you do have gestures. A gifted fox tooth, a perfectly cracked marrow bone, or the rare sharing of a dry sleeping spot. These are declarations of deep affection. You once saw someone give away the good part of a hair. It was practically a marriage proposal. Bathing isn't really a thing, but if someone scrapes the grime off your back with a flint scraper while humming what might be a tune, you're halfway to intimacy. The smell of your mate isn't something to hide. It's a reassuring blend of smoke, sweat, and crushed roots. Basically, the prehistoric equivalent of cologne, if cologne came with bits of bark in it. The mating ritual begins around the fire subtly. A glance, a grunt, an offered scrap of meat. You inch closer, testing the waters, or rather the furs. If they don't scoot away or throw a rock, you're making progress. There are no long conversations, no courtship dances, unless you count the awkward shuffle you do when trying to sit close without knocking over the cooking stone. Yet somehow it works. You've survived a winter together, and in your world, that's a commitment stronger than any spoken vow. And so you lie together, two steaming lumps in a sea of fur and bone, listening to the fire pop, and someone in the back of the cave snore like a dying bear. It's not glamorous, but in the Ice Age, it's downright romantic. Love for you begins and ends with shared warmth, a steady fire, and the unspoken agreement not to steal the last piece of roasted marrow. Your tribe consists of about 12 individuals, give or take, whoever didn't fall into a ravine this month. It's not a bustling metropolis. It's more like an uncomfortable family reunion that never ends. You don't swipe left or right. You just look across the fire and realize again that your only viable partner is the one who bit you last week over a rabbit thigh. This is the brutal math of prehistoric romance. Fewer people, fewer choices, higher chance your crush is also your second cousin. There's no shame in it, at least not yet. The concept of genetic diversity hasn't been invented, but even your instincts seem to know that repeating the same faces too many times might lead to some undesirable results. Which is why when a neighboring band visits during the warmer months, things suddenly get a little more flirtatious. You clean yourself up, which means scraping some dried gunk off your leg and shaking the lice out of your furs. You watch the visitors arrive with a level of interest usually reserved for mammoth sightings, a stranger with unfamiliar smells, and possibly fewer visible injuries. It's practically erotic. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Competition is fierce. One look, one gesture, one slightly less terrifying facial expression can make the difference between mate and awkward fireside avoidance for the next 3 winters. Back in your own group, the options are cozy. You know everyone's habits. Who steals meat? Who snorts while sleeping? Who can't make fire without panicking? Love in a small tribe is less about sparks flying and more about managing low expectations. If someone doesn't actively insult your cooking or throw rocks when annoyed, they're a keeper. That being said, relationships form. Sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of routine, and sometimes in the rarest of cases, because someone makes you laugh by mimicking a dying cave lion. It's the little things. Still, mating within such a tight circle comes with complications. Rivalries, jealousies, confusion over who's bonded with whom, especially when everyone sleeps in a pile and names are just different grunts. In a world this small, love isn't blind. It's just nearsighted and incredibly forgiving. You don't have a language. Not really. Not in the let's talk it out kind of way. You've got grunts, hand signals, facial twitches, and one very expressive eyebrow that somehow means both food and back off. It's a communication style built less on grammar and more on surviving long enough to grunt again tomorrow. Romance, as you might guess, is therefore an interpretive dance of vague noises and hopeful eye contact. You don't flirt with words, you flirt with posture. A subtle lean toward the fire, an offering of a slightly less burnt tuber, or a grunt pitched a little lower than usual. Think less Shakespearean sonnet, more enthusiastic throat clearing. You've tried to express feelings before, a thoughtful gift of moss, a shoulder pat that didn't accidentally dislocate anything. But emotions are hard to articulate when your vocabulary includes 5 vocalizations, one of which is reserved exclusively for falling rocks. Still, your tribe gets it. Somehow, amidst the roaring wind and snapping bones, they understand each other. One sharp grunt means danger. A soft cooing sound means you're trying to soothe a baby, or at least pretending it's not yours. And a long low groan while staring at. That may translate to they all survived or they all disappeared in the river. Hard to tell with her toothless mumbling. Your mate sleeps more now, wrapped in layers of hide like a grumpy burrito. You keep watch, shooing away anyone who gets too close. Especially that one cousin who still thinks flirting means showing off his squirrel skull collection. You worry, of course. The last birth wasn't easy. The healer used a mix of moss, humming, and hopeful squinting, but you're optimistic this time. Maybe it's the way your mate still sharpens her spear daily, or the fact that she hasn't thrown it at you in a week, and when she places your hand on her belly, swollen, warm, and unmistakably kicking, you feel something rare. Not just fear, not just survival, but the strange, tender hope that this tiny kicking creature might outlive you both, even if it does inherit your hairline. You're minding your own business, maybe sharpening a spear, maybe lovingly rearranging your flint collection when they show up. Tall, slender, suspiciously smooth foreheads, less brow ridge, weirdly artistic. These newcomers call themselves Homo sapiens, and they walk like they invented walking. At first, you don't know what to make of them. They smell different. Not bad, just intentional, like they rubbed berries on themselves on purpose. One of them draws something on a cave wall that actually looks like an animal. You're torn between awe and rage. You've spent years scratching mammoth-shaped blobs into stone, and here comes Captain Thin Nose, sketching like he's on prehistoric Pinterest. The sapiens have tools, too. But they're delicate. Bone needles, fishing hooks. Jewelry made from snail shells. You briefly wonder if one of them is single. Then you remember they also brought weird rituals, loud songs, and a tendency to domesticate everything, including you if you're not careful. Their language, faster. Maintaining plausible intimacy. And if you wake up tomorrow and they haven't stolen your best fur or wandered off with your flint blade, that's a relationship milestone. Your mate is pregnant again. You figured something was up when she hurled a pine cone at you for breathing too loudly. Also, she's been hoarding berries like a winter bear and throwing up every time someone roasts lizard near the fire. Classic signs. Pregnancy in the Ice Age isn't exactly a glowing miracle. It's more of a survival lottery with swollen ankles and unpredictable mood swings that could escalate to projectile bone clubs. There are no midwives, no prenatal herbs, and no concept of taking it easy. Just a heavily pregnant woman still expected to gather firewood and possibly club a hyena if it gets too nosy. You, of course, do your part. You offer her the juiciest grubs. You grunt supportively. You carve a vaguely humanoid figure into a stick and say, "For baby." She stares at it like she's deciding whether to be touched or annoyed. Probably both. The tribe has seen it all before. Babies are always arriving, some healthy, some not. Everyone keeps their expectations low and their spare pelts ready. A new life is a cause for celebration, yes, but also for anxious glances at dwindling food piles. More mouths, less mammoth. The elders tell you this is natural. One old woman points to her 10 children and says something. Lying next to your mate on a mossy pile that's 70% warmth, 30% insects, and 100% romantic. But what now? There's no Netflix, no deep philosophical post-lovemaking chat, just your breath visible in the cold air and the soothing drip-drip of water from a nearby stalactite. You roll over, making just enough noise to signal you're not asleep. Your mate responds with a grunt that could mean contentment, regret, or there's something crawling on me again. It's hard to tell. You attempt to initiate conversation, which consists of scratching your arm rhythmically and pointing at a rock formation that sort of looks like a bear. They nod, emotional connection established. You both settle into silence, not because you're awkward, but because you don't have the linguistic tools to make it awkward. There's comfort in that. No overthinking, no analyzing tone, no accidentally calling someone the name of your previous cave crush. You just exist. Together, warm and possibly covered in shared lice. Occasionally, your mate might reach over and pat your thigh with the tenderness of someone who didn't actively try to stab you today. That's affection. Or they'll hand you a slightly less filthy piece of hide to wrap around your shoulders. That's love. Or at least their way of saying, "You snore, but you have nice hair." And then comes the snoring. Loud, unfiltered, and deeply primal. A lullaby of gurgles and wheezes echoing off the cave walls. You don't mind. It's familiar. Like the sound of mammoths stomping in the distance or your neighbor choking on bone fragments. Pillow talk in your world isn't about words. It's about shared warmth, shared space, and the subtle art of not rolling too far into the cold while still. This. And there's no gallery to showcase your work. You just know that if you don't have at least 3 strange patterns on your chest, you're basically invisible in mating season. These tattoos, assuming we can call them that without offending modern tattoo artists, don't really have meanings. Or if they do, everyone forgot. Maybe they once represented bravery, lineage, or successful hunts. Now they mostly mean, don't stab me, I'm cool. Of course, with all this artistry and expression comes tension. Not everything is peaceful in the cave of love. If someone uses your favorite scraping stone without asking, you may experience a rage not seen since the last hyena raid. Jealousy runs deep, especially when the same 3 eligible adults keep making slightly too long eye contact around the fire. That's when things get awkward. Grunting becomes sharper. Elbows become pointier. You start flint-napping louder than necessary. Your rival might casually toss an extra-large spearhead into the pile. A silent power move that says, I killed a boar. What did you do today? And yet somehow it works. Amidst the clashing tools, ochre smears, and passive-aggressive bone carvings, relationships emerge. Because nothing says, I'm into you, like gifting someone a well-balanced Hondax and not immediately clubbing them with it. Love in the time of Neanderthals is loud, sharp-edged, and deeply practical. So, you've survived the hunt, shared your mammoth marrow, and exchanged vaguely romantic grunts by firelight. One thing leads to another, mostly because there are no doors in your cave. And now you're. Someone usually translates to, I find you acceptable in this dim smoke-filled light. Arguments happen, too, but they're fast and loud. A burst of flailing arms and intense glares. The upside is that once someone throws a stick, the conversation ends. Resolution by projectile. Surprisingly effective. But in this world of limited words, emotions still run deep. When your mate looks at you after a shared kill, blood on both your hands, soot on your face, and that unmistakable expression that says, you didn't completely ruin this hunt. That's affection, maybe even love. Children learn by mimicking, not listening. You once watched a toddler try to seduce a rock with a leaf because they saw the grown-ups do it. It was oddly convincing. So yes, you live without complex language, but you make do with glances, grunts, and the occasional playful nudge that doesn't end in injury. You don't need flowery speech to find connection. Just warmth, shared food, and the mutual understanding that if anyone takes your mammoth rib, they're sleeping outside. You're holding a sharp rock. That's not a metaphor. It's literally a rock you've been sharpening all morning with intense focus and vague sexual frustration. In your world, a well-shaped flint blade is not just a survival tool. It's an extension of your personality. Some say romance is dead. You say romance is shaped like a pointy scraper and stained with mammoth grease. When it comes to impressing a potential mate, tools are your flowers and poems. A hand axe with a good grip. That's seductive. A fire starter that only takes 3 strikes. Irresistible. You once saw someone craft a bone all so delicately that it caused a minor love triangle and at least one minor stabbing. But it's not just the tools. It's what you do with them. Like carved designs into your arms with ochre and bone shards. No one told you to do. What makes someone a good mate? Strength, sure, but also emotional availability, or as emotional as one can be while still occasionally chewing on raw liver. You begin performing. Your laughs are louder, your hunting tales more exaggerated. You pretend you weren't scared of the bear, even though you absolutely were. You sit closer to the fire so the flickering light catches your jawline just right. Subtle. One of them shows up one day wearing a feathered headdress and says, I'm reclaiming my youth. Everyone nods solemnly. No one mentions the dead chicken it clearly came from. Eventually, you give in. You add a little flair, a necklace here, a bone bracelet there. You catch your reflection in a puddle and think, maybe I don't look entirely like I rolled out of a bear den anymore. And for the first time, you understand a terrifying truth. Even in the Stone Age, appearances matter. You think courtship is about meat and grunting. And in many ways, you're not wrong. But beneath the mammoth stakes and awkward fire-gazing lies a budding complexity you never asked for, prehistoric psychology. You wake up one morning and realize you're strategizing. Should I bring her the biggest bone from the hunt, or is that too desperate? Welcome to proto-romantic anxiety, a delightful mental stew of insecurity, competitive instincts, and unspoken rules passed down through confused eyebrow twitches. You start noticing patterns. When you ignore her, she stares. When you stare, she ignores you. You think maybe she likes the mysterious type, so you pretend to be brooding. Unfortunately, this mostly just makes you look constipated. There are rituals now, not official ones, but they're emerging. A certain kind of flower gathered from the swamp that for some reason everyone agrees is romantic. Dancing around the fire in a particular way that signals, I'm single and have good knee joints. Gifting a shiny rock, but not too shiny, or you'll seem like you're trying too hard. Your cousin tried that once and got laughed out of the cave. He still hasn't recovered. Your tribe has no written language, but somehow there's a shared understanding of. That screamed, I killed this myself. But that was before the Homo sapiens brought style to the valley. Suddenly, it's not enough to wear mammoth skin. Now it has to be draped. Now beads matter. Now everyone's asking if your leggings are sable or mud-dyed. And you're like, what's mud-dyed, while standing there wearing a squirrel pelt tied with sinew. The younger Neanderthals, traders, are into it. One of them is braiding his hair with bird bones. Another shows up with face paint made from crushed berries and announces, this shade is called intimidated elk. You hate how good it looks. You try to keep up. You smear some ash under your eyes, thinking it gives a mysterious hunter vibe. Instead, it gives I fought a fire and lost. Your mate sigh and helps you wash it off with a handful of moss. It is not a proud moment. And the sapiens, they strut like peacocks. One of them wears a cape made from stitched-together rodent hides and walks like he's the shaman of Fashion Week. The worst part. Everyone stares in admiration. He probably doesn't even hunt. There's now an unspoken competition at every gathering. Who has the most vibrant beads? Whose furs are the cleanest? Who accessorized their club handle with decorative grooves and notches? It's exhausting. You begin to realize that fashion is no longer about warmth or function. It's about vibes. A whole cultural war is breaking out over decorative feathers. Someone actually tries to smuggle in dyed feathers from another tribe. A fight breaks out. Clubs are thrown. A necklace is snapped in slow motion. The elders grumble, but even they're not immune. Act cool. You casually sharpen your spear near them for 6 hours. You lift a heavy mammoth skull and flex unnecessarily. You cough loudly every time he speaks. Unfortunately, you have the social subtlety of a warthog with sunstroke. This strange new emotion, let's call it feeling, spreads fast. One of your cave cousins throws a rabbit carcass at his mate after she compliments a sap-ion stone bead necklace. Another Neanderthal breaks a perfectly good spear over jealousy-fueled rage, then cries when he realizes he has to recarve it. No one taught you how to deal with this. Your ancestors never had to compete with brainy, art-loving, smooth-talking cousins from the south. Back then, courtship was simple. Share meat. Don't club each other. Raise offspring until they can run from wolves. Now it's all mixed signals. Your mate smiles at you, but did she smile more at the guy who knows how to make fire without flint? You pat her head affectionately, and she recoils, not because of jealousy, because your hands still smell like fermented badger. One night, you catch her and the sap-ion laughing at something near the fire. You ask what's so funny. She tries to explain. You don't understand. It stings worse than stepping on sharp bone. That's when it hits you. Homo sapiens invented jokes and with them jealousy. So you storm off, sit on your rock and sulk dramatically. It's not productive, but it feels right. You don't know it, but you've just participated in the first prehistoric emotional spiral. Congratulations. You've officially unlocked an exclusive feature of sentient life, emotional torment. Now go punch a tree and pretend it helped. You used to think you looked good. Thick brow ridge, powerful jaw, a fur pelt. Full of vowels, and somehow condescending, even when they're just asking for berries. One of them tries to mime a greeting. You think they're choking on a beetle and hit them on the back. They stop talking to you after that, and then inevitably the flirting begins. The sapiens eye your tribe like you're a menu at a meat market. Some of your kin look back. After all, new blood is new blood. And those shell necklaces kind of hot. You suddenly feel deeply insecure about your own fur loincloth and lack of symmetrical tattoos. Mating across species lines becomes a thing. No one talks about it openly, but the cave next door has been suspiciously giggly lately, and a lot of ochre has gone missing. You don't hate them. Not exactly, but you can feel the change. They have strange tools, bigger groups, a tendency to build, organize, and complain about things like grain. You, on the other hand, still hunt, grunt, and survive. Still, you notice your mate watching them. Their fire burns hotter. Their cave doesn't smell like damp air. And they have this unsettling habit of smiling with their teeth. It's the beginning of the end. But you don't know that yet. You just know that one of them offered you cooked fish. And it was actually kind of good. You didn't even know you were capable of jealousy until one of the Homo sapiens gave your mate a shell bracelet with a polished center. Suddenly, something inside you snapped. Not a bone this time, but something deeper. You don't have a word for it, but it makes you want to growl, throw a rock, and mark your territory with extra urine. Your mate giggled at him. He's got smaller brow ridges, sure, and his pelt looks like it was washed in a stream that doesn't double as a urinal. But still, giggling, you try to. You say things like, "You remind me of a poem," while trying not to wheeze when your back spasms mid-bow. Because aging in a brothel is like being a fading wall scroll. Once admired, now mostly dusted around. Of course, there are legends of boys who age out gracefully, who marry rich clients, open their own tea houses, or vanish into myth like smoke through the rafters. But you suspect they're just that, legends. Probably made up by Madame Xiang to keep you moisturized and hopeful. So, you do what you must. You reapply the powder. You rehearse the lines. You laugh at jokes you've heard 1,000 times. And you hope that when your curtain finally falls, you'll still remember who you were beneath the paint. You've heard the word tossed around a lot. Freedom. Whispers between curtains. Drunken promises from clients. The occasional poem someone scrolls on a napkin before burning it in the lantern light. But what is it really? In the brothel, freedom is a concept sold with the same enthusiasm as scented soap. It's out there somewhere, but always one tip, one favor, or one miracle away. Madame Xiang sometimes dangles it like a carrot on a string. Serve well, and you may retire early, she'll say, as if retiring from this place didn't just mean you disappear one day and no one asks questions. Some say freedom is getting bought. As if becoming the private pet of a wealthy merchant is somehow liberation. Yes, you'd get a larger room and fancier silk, but you'd still be someone's ornament, just dusted more often. Others dream of escape, slipping out during festival chaos, hiding in a hay cart, reinventing yourself as a monk, a traveling musician, or something even more delusional, like a normal person. But you've seen what happens to those who try. Caught, dragged back, their punishment quiet and private, but loud enough to echo in the bones of everyone else. You once asked an older boy, one who'd been there since before you could hold a teacup without trembling, what freedom meant to him. He just laughed and said, "It's when you can choose who touches you." Then he went back to trimming his lashes. Now, as you apply your paint and rehearse your smile for another round of gentle company, you begin to wonder, maybe freedom isn't a door that opens. Maybe it's a corner of your mind they haven't reached, a hidden place where your name still exists, untouched by rouge and rumor. Maybe it's writing poems in code. Maybe it's knowing that the client missed Confucius and not correcting him because you know better. Maybe it's finishing your dance even when your ankles twisted because you decided you would. Tiny acts of rebellion dressed in silk and submission. So no, you're not free. Not yet. But inside where no lantern can reach, you're still yours. And in this place, that's a revolution. In the world of ancient Rome, clothing was never just about fabric stitched together. It was identity, reputation, and public status draped across the body for all to see. For women, no garment carried more weight than the stola. This long pleated dress was the defining costume of the respectable Roman matron, so much so that its absence could speak louder than its presence. If you were seen without one, society already had a story to tell about you, and it wasn't a flattering one. The stola itself was deceptively simple. A floor-length garment, sleeveless or with short sleeves, often secured at the shoulders and tied with one or more belts around the waist. But like all Roman fashion, simplicity concealed layers of meaning. The cut created an image of modesty, covering the body while still allowing elegance. It was designed to move gracefully, to glide with the wearer rather than cling. To Roman eyes, this restraint reflected a woman's virtue, her modesty, chastity, and loyalty to her household. Wearing the stole said, I belong to a family, to a husband, to Rome's social order. Material mattered just as much as form. A wealthy senator's wife might wear a stola of imported silk or linen, light as air, and dyed in colors that screamed expense. These dyes, Tyrian purple, saffron yellow, deep emerald, were luxuries in themselves. A middle-class woman, by contrast, might wear one of wool, simple and unadorned, echoing the old Roman ideal of modest living. Thus, the stola spoke two languages at once. It declared both respectability and rank. But not every woman had the right to wear it. Slaves, prostitutes, and women of ill root were excluded. Widows often abandoned it, signaling the loss of their marital bond. Even divorced women might be pressured to put it away. To wear or not to wear was a matter of social regulation, one that reinforced who was inside and who was outside the bounds of Roman morality. So when you imagine a Roman street scene, women in long flowing stirs crossing the forum or standing in temple courtyards, understand that you're not just looking at clothing. You're looking at a uniform of virtue, a garment heavy with meaning, one that whispered obedience, power, or shame depending on the eyes that saw it. If the stola was the foundation of Roman womanhood, the paler was its finishing touch. Imagine a large rectangular shawl, sometimes plain, sometimes richly decorated, draped over the stola in endless variations. The paler was both cloak and canvas. How it was worn could signal a woman's mood, her intentions, and even her social aspirations. The simplest way was to let it hang loosely over the shoulders, a sign of relaxation or domestic comfort. But in public, women often pulled it tightly around the body, creating a cocoon of modesty. This was especially important in the bustling chaos of Roman streets, where men shouted, vendors bargained, and eyes followed every movement. Draping the paler over the head almost like a veil transformed it into a symbol of chastity and reverence, particularly during religious ceremonies. A matron entering a temple with her head covered by the pall wasn't just respecting the gods. She was visually proclaiming her dignity to everyone present. Color and fabric elevated the message. Fine wool in muted tones gave an air of traditional Roman virtue, while silks dyed in luxurious purples and reds made a very different statement. Wealth, power, and connections that reached beyond Rome into the trade networks of the East. Elite women knew that eyes lingered on silk that shimmered in the sunlight, and they used that effect to command attention without a single word. A carefully draped paler could show just enough of the jewels or embroidery beneath to tease status while still maintaining the appearance of modesty. But the paler could also carry moral judgment. A woman who neglected to wear it in public might be criticized as careless or immodest. Sadists like Juvenal mocked women who draped it too provocatively, twisting its folds into something flirtatious rather than respectable. Thus, the paler was a double-edged garment, a shield of virtue, yet also a stage prop in Rome's endless theater of appearances. For Roman women, fashion was rarely neutral. Every gesture of fabric, whether the paler was clutched close, swept dramatically over the shoulder, or drawn across the head, was a line in the ongoing performance of identity. In a society that scrutinized women's behavior relentlessly, the paler gave them a language of folds and drapery to speak without words. In ancient Rome, hair was not just hair. It was a stage for wealth, power, and personality. For elite women, hairstyles became architectural wonders, with braids coiled like serpents, curls piled high into towers, and intricate arrangements held together by pins of ivory, silver, or even gold. To step out into society with a plain hairstyle was unthinkable for those who could afford extravagance. The head, after all, was the first thing people noticed. And in Rome, first impressions could make or break reputations. During the Republic, styles were simpler. Buns at the nape of the neck, hair parted in the middle, modestly arranged to reflect traditional Roman virtues of restraint and discipline. But by the Empire, especially under the Julio, Claudian and Flavian dynasties, restraint gave way to spectacle. Empresses like Julia Domina or the Flavian women turned their hair into living crowns towering several inches high. These coiffures required not only patience, but also an army of enslaved hairdressers known as ornatresses, who spent hours arranging every curl into perfection. The complexity of the style itself became a sign of wealth. If you had the time and servants to construct it, you clearly belonged to the highest class. Wigs and false hair pieces were another layer of the fashion. Roman women often imported blonde hair from Germany or red hair from Gaul, attaching it to their own locks to create contrast or volume. These additions added exotic flair, signaling both sophistication and Rome's dominion over faraway lands. Critics, of course, were quick to point out the irony. The same women who flaunted German hairpins were dressing themselves with the hair of conquered barbarians. Hairstyles also carried political undertones. Imitating the empress's hairdo was a way of aligning oneself with the ruling family. If the empress wore waves of curls across her forehead, soon dozens of aristocratic women in Rome copied the look. Fashion thus spread not through magazines or TikTok trends, but through the silent power of imperial influence. To style your hair a certain way was to declare loyalty or at least admiration for the dynasty in charge, but there was danger in excess. Sadists like Juvenal mocked women whose hair grew so tall it needed scaffolding of wires. He claimed their heads resembled ships ready for battle. Whether admired or ridiculed, Roman women's hairstyles were never neutral. Each curl was a statement, each braid a message. Their hair was not vanity. It was politics woven strand by strand. If clothing spoke of virtue and hair revealed fashion, jewelry was where Roman women made their boldest declarations of wealth and power. Rings, necklaces, earrings, and bracelets weren't just decorative. They were investments, status symbols, and sometimes even political tools. The glitter of gold and the shimmer of gemstones announced a woman's place in society before she even introduced herself. Earrings were especially popular. Elite women wore elaborate pairs inlaid with pearls imported from the Persian Gulf or India. Gems that traveled thousands of miles to rest on Roman ears. A single pearl could cost more than a soldier's yearly wage. And Roman writers loved to point out the extravagance. Pliny the Elder famously lamented that women wore entire fortunes dangling from their ears. To him, it was wasteful excess. To Roman matrons, it was a visible guarantee of their household's prosperity. Necklaces and chains often featured pendants of amethyst, emerald, or carnelian carved into cameos. These weren't just pretty stones. Many Romans believed gems carried protective or mystical properties. Amethyst was thought to guard against drunkenness, while coral was worn as a charm against evil spirits. Thus, jewelry served not only as adornment, but as a shield of superstition. A Roman woman might step into the forum with a necklace that was both a fashion piece and a silent prayer. Bracelets, often worn in pairs, encircled wrists, and sometimes even the upper arm. Designs mimicked snakes coiling around the limb, symbolizing eternity and rebirth. Rings were another favorite, often large and flashy, displaying gems engraved with family symbols, deities, or protective motifs. Though Roman law limited men to wearing one ring for citizenship, women were free to pile them on, and many did so with pride. For wealthy women, jewelry boxes were miniature treasure vaults. Goldsmiths and craftsmen catered to their tastes, while husbands often gifted jewels as tokens of affection or as public proof of their ability to provide. But jewelry could also become a source of criticism. Writers sneered at women who covered themselves in so many jewels that they resembled walking treasure chests, accusing them of vanity and greed. Still, jewelry endured as one of the most personal and powerful aspects of Roman women's fashion. Unlike the stola or palla, which were governed by social rules, jewelry was more flexible. It allowed women to showcase individuality, to blend luxury with superstition, and to wear their wealth literally on their skin. If clothing and jewelry framed the Roman woman's outward identity, cosmetics and perfumes added the finishing brush strokes. To the modern eye, Roman beauty practices might seem indulgent, but in antiquity, they were serious business. Skin, scent, and makeup became tools of persuasion, allure, and sometimes even subtle defiance of social expectations. The ideal Roman complexion was pale, smooth, and unblemished. To achieve it, women used chalk powders, ground white lead, or even vinegar-based facial masks. Some recipes promised to brighten the skin, others to erase wrinkles or scars. Wealthier women had access to exotic ingredients imported from across the empire. Egyptian kohl, Babylonian powders, and rare resins. Of course, some of these mixtures were toxic, but beauty often came at a cost. To step into society with clear, pale skin was to show you didn't labor under the sun, that you lived a life of leisure, far removed from the toil of commoners. Rouge was equally important. Red cheeks and lips were painted using crushed mulberries, wine, dregs, or cinnabar. A touch of color signaled youth and vitality, but too much provoked scandal. Sadists gleefully mocked women who overpainted their faces, accusing them of hiding behind masks. Yet the demand for rouge never disappeared. It was the little secret every Roman woman carried on her skin. Eye makeup was another battlefield. Black kohl drawn in bold lines around the eyes created dramatic definition and was borrowed directly from Egyptian traditions. Green and blue eyeshadows made from malachite or lapis lazuli added flair, though they were costly. To critics, these painted eyes suggested decadence. To admirers, they were captivating. Perfumed oils were then applied to the hair and body, completing the ensemble with invisible luxury. Perfumes themselves were an empire within the empire. Rome imported spices and resins from Arabia, India, and North Africa, blending them into complex fragrances stored in glass bottles or alabaster jars. The scent of frankincense, myrrh, or cinnamon clung to a woman as strongly as her slur or jewels. Perfume announced her arrival before she spoke and lingered after she left. A sensual signature. But as with all aspects of fashion, there was tension. Philosophers condemned heavy cosmetics and perfumes as signs of vanity or moral weakness. Still, for Roman women navigating a world that judged their appearance relentlessly, these powders and oils weren't just vanity. They were armor. With every painted cheek and perfumed wrist, they crafted power out of beauty. Though Roman women's fashion is often remembered for flowing fabrics and elaborate hairstyles, footwear was equally important. Shoes were more than protection for the feet. They were indicators of class, occasion, and even morality. To step into the world in the wrong pair was to risk whispers, satire, or outright exclusion. At the simplest level, Roman women wore sandals or solii, flat-soled and strapped with leather. These were the everyday choice, practical for the home and the warmer streets of Rome. Their simplicity, however, did not mean invisibility. Wealthy women could have their sandals decorated with colored leather, dyed straps, or even gilded studs, turning a humble design into a quiet flex of luxury. For indoor wear, especially in private households, some women went barefoot, suggesting intimacy and domestic ease. When stepping into public spaces, more formal footwear appeared. Calque closed leather shoes with laces were typically worn by the upper classes. Women often paired them with their stallers and palas for religious ceremonies or public appearances where formality mattered. The leather might be dyed in rich colors, reds, greens, even purples, showcasing expense and craftsmanship. These weren't shoes made for running through muddy streets. They were made to be seen. There were also specialized shoes for different settings. Banquets or theater visits might call for softer, more luxurious slippers, often embroidered or lined with delicate materials. In contrast, travel demanded sturdier footwear, thicker-soled shoes that could endure rough terrain. Even within the domestic sphere, footwear varied. Women of wealth might own slippers inlaid with jewels or precious metals, worn only within the safety of their villas, never risking the dust of the forum. Footwear could even carry symbolic weight. Certain shoes were reserved for rites and rituals, their colors or styles tied to religious meanings. High-soled shoes added stature and grace, lifting the wearer above the crowd, both literally and socially. Some shoes were designed to creak as the wearer walked, ensuring attention wherever she went. Writers often sneered at women who obsessed over fashionable shoes, accusing them of vanity or frivolity. Yet in reality, footwear was an extension of the broader Roman obsession with appearances. Just as the stolar and palace spoke of virtue, so too did shoes reveal refinement, wealth, and cultural awareness. To Roman women, even the smallest detail beneath their hem was another chance to declare who they were and who they were not. In Rome, fabric was never just fabric. It was a silent battlefield of class, wealth, and power. What you wore and especially what color it was told the world not just who you were but what you were allowed to be. For women, this choice was deeply political. Wool was the traditional Roman fabric, practical and tied to old republican values of modest living. Women in humbler households spun and wore their own wool, and a plain wool stoler marked a woman as virtuous, hard-working, and respectable. But as Rome expanded and the empire's wealth grew, fabrics from across the known world began to flood the markets. Linen from Egypt, cotton from India, and above all, silk from China transformed elite fashion. Silk was light, translucent, and scandalously expensive. To critics, it represented moral decline, proof that Roman women were draping themselves in the spoils of empire. To those who wore it, silk was pure prestige. Every shimmer in the sunlight, a reminder of their family's reach and resources. Color, too, carried enormous weight. White wool suggested purity and simplicity, especially appropriate for ceremonies and religious rituals. Bright saffron was linked to weddings, fertility, and celebration. Deep greens and blues offered fashionable variety, but could never rival the status of purple. Tyrian purple made from thousands of crushed sea snails was the most coveted dye in the Roman world. So rare and costly was this pigment that laws restricted its use. Only emperors, empresses, and certain members of the elite could wear full garments of purple, though clever women often incorporated narrow stripes or borders into their stallers or palas to hint at power without breaking the rules. The politics of dye meant that a Roman woman's clothing was essentially a walking manifesto. A plain wool stoler could say, "I honor tradition," while a silk paler in shimmering purple declared, "My family commands wealth and influence." The tension between these choices reflected the constant tug-of-war in Roman society, between old republican ideals and imperial extravagance. Sadists like Juvenal ridiculed women who draped themselves in fabrics finer than spiderweb, mocking their husbands for bankrupting themselves on foreign luxuries. Yet fashion was impossible to restrain as long as Rome remained an empire of conquest and trade. Its women would continue to wrap themselves in the colors of the world and in doing so make themselves living emblems of Rome's reach. In Rome, a woman's clothing was more than personal taste. It was a script she was forced to perform every day. Fashion revealed class as clearly as titles or wealth, and stepping outside those boundaries risked criticism or scandal. To dress was to declare who you were, and everyone was watching. For the elite, fashion was a stage of opulence. Senatorial and equestrian families draped their women in fine fabrics, jeweled accessories, and elaborate hairstyles that required teams of servants to maintain. A senator's wife strolling through the forum in a silk stoller with a purple border sent a clear message. This was a household of wealth and influence. The very impracticality of her clothing, delicate fabrics, towering hairstyles, jewelry heavy enough to strain the neck showed that she never had to work, that her life was far removed from the sweat of the marketplace or the fields. For the middling classes, fashion played a subtler role. Wives of merchants, artisans, or military officers might not afford silk or precious stones, but they could still signal respectability with wool stolers, modest palace, and carefully kept hairstyles. Here, clothing was less about dazzling displays and more about upholding honor. The woman's neat, restrained appearance reflected well on her household, telling neighbors that her family valued discipline and stability. At the lowest level of society, fashion was stripped to its basics. Enslaved women wore tunics, simple, practical garments meant for labor, not beauty. Their hair was often cropped short or tied back with little opportunity for adornment. Prostitutes, by law, were barred from wearing the slur, marking them instantly as outside the circle of respectable womanhood. Their clothing was deliberately provocative, designed to set them apart. Thus, garments did not merely express status, they enforced it. The Roman system of fashion also reinforced hierarchy in subtler ways. Laws known as sumptuary regulations tried to restrict extravagance, dictating who could wear certain fabrics or colors. Though often ignored by the wealthy, these laws underscored the point. Fashion was not freedom. It was a regulated performance of social class. For Roman women, then every garment was loaded with meaning. Clothing told the story of her household, her husband's rank, her family's wealth, or lack of it. Whether she wanted to or not, her fashion choices bound her to the system of class, turning her body into a billboard for Rome's social order. For Roman women, fashion was never just personal. It was political theater woven in silk, wool, and gold. Every stoller, every pal, every curl of hair was read as a sign of loyalty, morality, or ambition. In a society where women were excluded from formal politics, clothing became their language of influence, a way to maneuver within the rigid structures of Rome. Empresses set the tone. When Livia, wife of Augustus, appeared in simple white garments and understated jewelry, she was projecting the ideal of the modest traditional matron, a perfect complement to Augustus' political image of restoring Roman virtue after years of civil war. Later, empresses like Julia Dahmer with her iconic halo of curls made hair itself a political statement replicated across the empire by women who sought to align themselves with the imperial household. By copying an empress's style, elite women visually declared loyalty to the dynasty, turning fashion into propaganda. Public appearances made clothing even more significant. At religious festivals, women veiled their heads with the pall to signal reverence. At banquets, they wore brighter colors and displayed jewels to reflect their family's prosperity. Fashion operated as a sliding scale of messages. Piety in one setting, luxury in another, all while maintaining the careful balance of modesty expected of a Roman woman. Too plain, and she risked appearing neglectful; too extravagant, and she became a target for satire and moral outrage. Writers and politicians understood this power. Sadists like Juvenal ridiculed women whose fashion seemed to undermine traditional values, accusing them of corruption or greed. Meanwhile, moralists argued that excessive silks and jewels were signs of Rome's decline, blaming women for embracing foreign luxuries. Yet, this criticism only proved how much weight fashion carried. Women's clothing became a convenient canvas for broader anxieties about empire, wealth, and morality.